I would like to introduce our first speaker. So perhaps if we can bring Pete onto the stage here, Sam. So Pete, good morning. Well,
good morning.
I'm not sure where you are in the world, so I don't know what time zone you're in, but
Eastern time. I'm in Florida right now.
Right. Okay. So it is good morning then, just about.
For sure.
Okay, brilliant. So Pete's the CISO of for North America at Checkmarks, and I will let's get Pete's slides on the screen, and I'll give Pete the stage. So Pete, thank you for joining us, and I'll let you crack on.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone. It's an honor to be here today. I'm excited to talk about how we can get better together. So as stated, I'm a CISO of North America at Checkmarks. I am of Tribe Developer, and that is my career. I happen to be in information security right now, specifically application security, but I really, my passion is around development. And it's funny that in security, it's often not about the tech. It's usually about people and process, same as it is in development. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that today. A little bit about Checkmarks. We are an application security company. The finding, the fixing, the preventing, looking at your applications, which have changed over the last 15, 20 years. The definition of an application has just grown and exploded. The number of things that developers need to be aware of and security professionals need to train on it continues to expand. Of course, one of the things that I think about with development is hygiene, but not, as was suggested in the talk, the kind of, I've been up all night, which I have done, and been at the computer working hard on a problem, sometimes in the office, sometimes at home. It's more for me about how we think about our process and how we think about getting better. Do we have good habits around how we create the software that we're paid to build? Now, I'll start this talk with feedback. And this is a bit of a cheeky talk, as you can see by the title. But, feedback is a gift if you choose to take it that way. And, I've given a lot of talks around feedback. And one of the keys here is that you should ask. So I'll ask you to be receptive of this feedback and not take it the wrong way. It's not meant to be a weapon. It's not meant to hit you on the nose with, because we can only get better if we understand the things we're deficient in. And those are very hard sometimes to look in the mirror and say, yeah, I'm not my best self, or I didn't do my best job here. So this is meant, this entire talk is meant to really take a look at ourselves, how we do business, and whether or not those are the right things that we should be pursuing. Critical to improvement is to be able to take a step outside. If you've been in your company for a long time, I've been in a company as long as 12 and a half years, and it's very hard to look at what you do on a daily basis and understand whether or not those are still the things that you should be doing. The traditions that you build up, the norms that you build up in a company, even if they were right at some point in time, the old saying, what got you here won't get you there, is absolutely true. So to be able to look critically, and sometimes this requires a friend, someone from the outside, maybe even someone that you hire to come in and have a look. Let's inspect what we do, and let's be clear-eyed about this. So we'll start by looking in the mirror. What do you think of your own capabilities, your team's capabilities, your company's capabilities? Are you honest with each other and with yourself around what you can accomplish and what you can't? And it's okay to be deficient in something. It's okay to struggle, but it's really not okay for you to have this fake image of yourself where, yeah, I'm a Superman, we can do anything, don't worry about it. That doesn't lead to good outcomes. And if you look at the goals that you have for your sprints, for instance, if we take a look at a sprint, do you do stories in, stories out? Are you completing the definition of done? Are you really looking critically in your retros to say, hey, how could we be better? What really didn't go right? Instead of being, about patting yourself on the back. Key to software development is to build muscle in the right areas. So I coached soccer for 15 years, from the time my children were 4 years old until they were a freshman in college and turning 19. Uh, the key to soccer coaching is that you need every practice to look like a game, the pieces of the game. It's not the entire game, but pieces and parts of this. Oftentimes, I would see coaches taking their kids up to hills and running up and down hills, or running in the bleachers. Um, but I can tell you from seeing lots of soccer, I've never seen it played on a hill. I've never seen it played in the bleachers. So my question to them is, what muscles are you building for those children right now, and how will that help you in the game? No doubt they're building some endurance and they're building some muscle, but if you don't make it look like the game, then those muscles aren't going to help you in that context. So think about that. In this case, are our lower environments, our development, our quality, staging, UAT, etc., are those done exactly the same way that you do production? Because if they're not, then I would ask you, what are you actually testing and what value does that testing provide? And if we talk and lean into testing now, and this is less true in DevOps, when you think about test-driven development, definition of done, uh, teams tend to be better these days than in the past around their testing habits from a functional perspective. But if you look at security specifically, when are you testing for security? Are you bolting the engine on the plane and then saying, hey, what could possibly go wrong? Well, that is a way to test, but understand that when you do it that way, you're finding a whole bunch of things at a time when you're really not capable of dealing with them. And now what? Now what are we going to do? So the theory and the thinking around testing, no matter whether it's functional requirements or non-functional requirements, if you look at Toyota production system, when's the earliest we could have found this? How could we have prevented this? Uh, can I find a way to find this earlier to take risk out of my story such that I can deliver it during my sprint? So when we test late, what happens? No one fixes everything that they find. That includes quality too. I've been shipping software for a very long time, and I know that quality bugs leave. This is good enough. This is close enough. It's time. We need to ship. But if you think about how you test, what you test for, and what your capabilities are you testing for too much? So in security, you could look for every security vulnerability that the security tooling could find across all of the different areas. So you think about infrastructure as code, containers, API, you think about your static analysis, dynamic analysis. Those can find thousands of problems in your code. And the question is, and this is to the security people as well, what is your policy? I often talk to people about their security scanning and their security policies, and what they say is, well, we want to fix everything. And then if I ask them, well, what are you fixing? Well, we'd like to get to half of the highs by the end of the year, which means that we spend a great deal of time looking at things that we're not going to fix, looking at things that, frankly, we're not capable of fixing. So if you're scanning for everything, but only able to fix a small fraction, well, it doesn't mean that you don't want to fix those things, but if you're not capable of it, then you end up bailing these things up at the end of the release, talking about those exception processes and making sure that you can push this thing out to production. And then if you look at your aggregated tech debt over time, it's not a pretty picture. You end up with a Jira backlog full of vulnerabilities and flaws that, frankly, you're probably never going to fix. And, I remember as Scrum Master, as team lead, going back through those once or twice a year and just truing up with myself, saying, this isn't going to get fixed. We need to push this out. We need to get rid of this. We need to say this won't be fixed. So if you think about what you test for and your capabilities, those should line up closely. It's okay to lean over the line and say, hey, we're only able to fix highs, so we're going to do highs and mediums or some portion of those mediums. We're going to start to keep track of those and measure those. We're going to start to build out our practices on how we get better. Because what's inevitably going to happen is something like log4j. And in that case, because people didn't have the right muscles built around incident response, all of your development was upended. You said, okay, everybody stop. Let's look for what we have here. And in the case of someone running this incident, as a lead of AppSec, so I used to run application security for the Bank of Montreal, and I was responsible for over 2,000 applications. I would have to say, all right, let me look at the entire list of all the applications I have. I need to break these into 3 different lists. Things that I know are vulnerable, things that I know are not vulnerable, and things I'm not sure about yet. And then eventually you have to work those lists down to everything's not vulnerable to end this incident response. So you're going to teams, asking them, do they have this version of the software, and what are they capable of doing in that case? But because we didn't have good hygiene habits around being able to upgrade our software, these became very difficult conversations. And I know from experience in talking to my peers, sometimes in months, we're measuring these on calendars. And that is not DevOps. That is not Agile. So let's take a look at this and understand why. Now, of course, from a security perspective, I look at open source and I think about this as one of the scariest places for a company. And that's because if you're in a company that has a security practice, there are controls around your first and second party software that hold you to account for some level of standard. So we have scanning, we look at it, here are the vulnerabilities, here's what you're supposed to fix. Now, whether you fix them or not, we are at least aware of them. We vet the employees that we bring into the company. In the case of open source, that's not the case. I didn't hire these people. We don't scan their software in the same way. And these things get brought in to build our applications, and it accounts for 80 to 95% of the software that we ship, which is extremely scary for a security professional because I don't have controls around that. And when we think about open source, we consider it a free lunch. I take it in, I use it, and I don't have to worry about it. But open source is really more like a free puppy. When I decide to use an open source library, I now take on some responsibility to my company And that's both from the development point of view and from the security point of view, to give it care and feeding. Now, you don't have to do that, but that's animal cruelty. We have to think about what responsibilities we take on when we use this software. And as a developer, I know, because I've done it, we integrate and abandon. It does what I need it to do, so I don't need to look back. I can say, hey, job done, product functions. I have important things to do. I've got a huge backlog of stuff to get after, and tech debt is not top of my concern, because this library, it works. But this software continues to grow and change and mature in ways that are sometimes good, sometimes require a great deal of change. If you think about, it's, for instance, S3 buckets, when those were created, Amazon really had no idea how they would be utilized, what kind of configurations were necessary. Developers got in there, started pulling it back and saying, oh, look at all the cool things I can do. The same is true of any of this software out there in the open source community. We find new and novel ways to make use of it. Now, sometimes we're going to find vulnerabilities have been in that code since day one, 0 days. And we're going to say, oh, we need to make a change. Now, it's not to say that, that as we use this software, these things come to light over time, sometimes decade or more, that this vulnerability has been in there. So there are ramifications to that where I'm going to want to upgrade this, but also as this software changes. So if I go from a version 1 to a version 3 or a version 4, it may change the way I have to package my application. It may change the way I have to do authentication. APIs may have been updated. So when I go to upgrade these, they may be a big change. And in these kind of incidents, if you are writing Java software at the end of last year, that you're under a great deal of pressure. The business is in jeopardy. There are attacks going on presently, and we're afraid of them, and we need to get it done. So we're going to the team. We're saying, you have this vulnerability. We need you to upgrade. When can you get it done? And that kind of constant pressure as an incident response leader, I would have been in a daily meeting with our CISO to talk about where we were, what progress was being made, where I'm being blocked, the help that I need. And then after that meeting, the rest of the day would be in phone calls and meetings to go back to those teams and understand where we are and what we're going to do and how they're being delayed or what kind of problems they're having. So that is not a productive environment. That is not a place where doing things that are normal, if it's an abnormal act, if it's something I haven't done frequently, which is the reason for this talk, if I don't do it regularly, it becomes an unnatural act under pressure, which is not a great way to get things done. So there's a continuum of how you might experience this, from the easy button all the way over to, it upends everything and all work stops, releases are delayed, bug fixes don't happen. In the case of this particular one, Log4j was released several times where it's like, hey, we need you to upgrade to the, oh, wait, no, that didn't work. Okay, let's go to this next. Oh, no, that's not the one. Okay, here's the real one. There were also ways to mitigate these vulnerabilities. So there was a lot of churn and change happening at the same time. And again, if you're not used to making these changes, then these are very impactful to your program. So what can we do about this problem? How can we think about this in a different way that allows us to lean into good practices that allow these to become normal occurrences? And the first one, which is going to be typical for, I hope, for our audience here, if you think about Agile, if you think about DevOps, DevSecOps, having that learning culture, that continuous improvement, always being constructively dissatisfied with where you are. hey, we're very happy with where we are, but we want to be here and I want to go in that direction. Understanding that failure is an opportunity to learn and not a time for us to have a witch hunt. These are the things that I want to be baked into my company's culture and my team's culture. And if that is not the world that you live in, this should be job one of saying, hey, we're here to learn. We're here to get better. I can't know everything. And as we go, we need to understand that failure is absolutely an option. And we're going to learn from it and get better at it. As you think about technical debt, oftentimes this is the last thing that gets considered. You have a giant backlog of work and a constant pressure from the business to deliver on that backlog, to bring out new functionality, to move the business forward, to enable customers, to enable sales, to make money for the company. And all of that is great. But the second that you finish writing that software, it's technical debt. It's aging on the shelf as it's being used. Now, in the case of open source, I think about it from a drift point of view, that you're drifting from current. So if we go back to that thought of integrate and abandon, if I integrate version 1, and then version 1.1 comes out, and version 1.2, we're version 1.5, and then we're up to version 2, I'm drifting farther and farther away in time, in implementation, from the current version of that software. And if I'm forced to upgrade, but I don't practice those upgrades, this is dissimilar to thinking about, I often hear the company say, well, we need to be able to roll back. And if you deliver software and think about your roll forward plan, my upgrade, so I build an increment and I ship that increment to production, whether that's a single piece flow or whether that's the end of a sprint or whether you're doing waterfall, I'm making a change and I'm moving that change into production. If you think about what it takes to get to that point, all of the testing that has occurred to get you to the point where you can do an upgrade, and now they say, hey, we also want to be able to downgrade. Well, shouldn't we test that? I have done downgrades in a crisis when I've created an outage, and it's no fun. You're doing a little bit of guesswork. You're working really fast on something that really should have been practiced. So if the intent from a company perspective is we always want to have a downgrade path, then as an engineering leader, I want to make sure that my teams practice that. That becomes part of the definition of done. Have you proven that you can move the software forward and then move it backward successfully? Because if you don't do that, then all bets are off. Same is true here. As you think about moving that software up, is it a breaking change? If I upgrade a library from one version to another, I mean, Log4j is a very simple example that does a very simple thing, but there are more complex examples in open source where if I move it, I have to make a bunch of changes to the software. And if I need to move it back because it broke something, I'm going to have to undo all those changes. So do you have the right level of testing that says, if I change this library, everything works or not? Because if you don't, then we should have a look at that. But think about making sure that you've built the muscle that says, I'm going to keep current to some degree of current, or I'm at least going to measure it and understand it. A couple of minor versions, never a major version, those kind of things. So those are the things that I want you to think about. And now we get into that hygiene. You could buy a car, and the manufacturer will recommend for every 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 miles, depending on the kind of oil, the kind of car, you should, keyword is should, perform that regular maintenance. Now, the great thing about regular maintenance in this sense is that it can be done at a time that's convenient to you. You get to pick when this maintenance happens because we're not in crisis mode. It is inexpensive. And we could talk in terms of software, but in terms of cash and money for an oil change, $50. And it takes a very short amount of time. 15, 20 minutes, oil change done. I move on with my day. It allows the car to operate better for longer. Now, if I choose not to do that, as in the case of software, then what's going to happen is all of a sudden that car is going to stop working. And I don't get to pick when that happens. So it could be at the most inopportune time in my life. It is now going to be very expensive. It's no longer cheap. And the amount of time it's going to take to perform that maintenance to get that car running again is going to be measured on a calendar. So incredibly inconvenient. This is what we do in our software practice sometimes when we don't think about technical debt. We don't think about upgrades. We don't think about moving our architecture, our designs, our deployment patterns along with the times, such that what would have been inexpensive to move between minor versions of an open source library now becomes a major uplift to make a bunch of change that could cost months of time. You should look at how long it's going to take you from the time that someone says, I need to make a change, to the time you're able to implement that change across whatever it is. So again, you're accruing technical debt in a number of areas. You're accruing it architecturally, you're accruing it in the open source that you're utilizing. Your process as a whole, are you doing waterfall? Are you doing agile? Are you doing DevOps? How much time would it take you if someone dropped into your sprint and said, hey, critical, downtime, whatever, how long would it take you to implement that change and get it to production and feel safe about it? I mean, anyone could make a software change and push it and hope, but that's not the way we run a good business and a good engineering practice. So what would it take to move from there to there? So it's about building the right muscles. Again, if it looks like the game, if you practice like you play, if your lower environments and your testing are all happening in an automated fashion and they look the same, whether you're doing a development test or you're doing a quality test or you're in your staging environment to production, if all of those things are scripted and run headless and run the exact same way, such that if you find a mistake, you can move that mistake backwards in your testing lab. Those are the muscles that you want to build. Being able to upgrade those libraries because I have quality tests around them that say, I understand the usage of this library, and if I make a change, I can now quickly test and ascertain whether or not that change is going to break my implementation. Those are muscles you want to have, and be able to now quickly cycle through and say, on a quarterly basis, so similar to what we do in IT, am I doing patches? Am I doing those upgrades? Am I saying, well, I don't want to do it all the time continuously. That's not really relevant to me. Maybe I'll do it monthly, maybe I'll do it quarterly, but it's planful. I understand the debt that I'm accruing, and I'm now going to take that and pay down that debt over time every quarter, which means that I'm building that muscle around those upgrades. Think about the objectives that you want. Think about what KPIs do you have that understand this? Are you measuring the amount of technical debt that you're accruing? Do you have that ledger that says, here are the things that are now out of date? Here are the things that need to be put somewhere in a sprint at some point. Now, it's okay to decide that you are going to accrue this debt. I often think about when I bought my first home. You move in. I don't have a lot of money. I spent most of it on buying the house in the first place. I now am faced with a house full of empty furniture. Well, I'm going to go out and get some credit, and I'm going to start to fill the rooms. I don't fill them all at once. I prioritize things. I say, this is important today. I want to have a nice kitchen set. I want to have a nice place to entertain. Maybe I'm sleeping on the mattress on the floor for now. I don't care. So these are the ways that, in your life, you think about managing debt. Apply that to your software practice. Be mindful of what you do and be able to pay that down, or at least understand how much that's going to cost if you have to pay it down. So as you look at that continuum from where you are today by looking in the mirror to where you want to be, in that ideal scenario of upgrades just happen magically, I take the latest version of open source and I just roll it in, I run my tests and I deploy it into production continuously. Well, that's great. If you're not there, then understand what it's going to take between those two, and then pick that point where you're actually going to land. How much money are you willing to spend? How much effort are you willing to put in? how much change are you willing to make in the way that you build and deploy your software to get you to that point, and then do it. So really, this talk has been around building out the right habits and building the right muscles that can help you in those crisis situations. The worst thing you can do is walk away from a crisis and run back to work. The best thing you can do is to lean into that, to say, what could we have learned from this? How could this have been better? And that's really what I want you to take away from this. So I appreciate your time, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Hey, Pete, thanks for that. And thanks for getting up so early. It's one of the things, not even breakfast time there yet, is it? It's an excellent job.
It is not, but I have coffee. That's the important part.
Power through. So there are a couple of questions. So I'll put these on screen as well. So Ikram asked, how much of technical debt and the current state of application security is down to developer talent debt, i.e. people who are fixed in their ways, won't update their skills? And secondly, how can non-decision makers, I guess, like Ikram, influence that situation as well?
That's an awesome question. And certainly, as we look at how development and the very definition of an application has changed over time. It used to be about my first party code and second party code. Now we introduce open source. We introduce infrastructure as code, where I'm now picking the container and the operating system that I'm running on. I need to harden that. These are things that developers never had to think about. So it's definitely a talent debt. Measuring the places that you fail, understanding where you want to be and what it's going to take to get there, understanding you're not going to get there overnight. But this is about being mindful of where you are and mindful of the goals, and then putting the effort into the right place. So this needs to be a business decision, because it's classic that what you want for your development teams, and as a development leader, I strove to do this, but it's super hard. You want a day where people can unwind and think. But having a 5-day sprint be actually 4 days of work and 1 day of mental work, who buys that? The business looks at that and say, why are your developers sitting around? Why aren't they doing things? I'm like, they actually are. And, you have all this evidence that proves that they're actually better doing that, but that's not the way you typically run. So it's about having that ledger and saying, look, we're building this stuff up and this is going to be bad. I look at that Log4j example to say, that's a perfect example about why we should be building these muscles. So, writing it down, making it visible, and talking to your business leaders about it.
Yeah, for sure.
I particularly enjoyed many of your extremely vivid metaphors in that talk that I may well have to steal for future talks of my own. The free puppies, not free lunch, and open source age is like milk and not wine. They're both two of my favorites. And of course, the sport's called football, but I'll give you that.
All right. Yes, I am in love with that sport. It is the beautiful game. So yes.
I think it says something about the state of sport in the US when people start actually talking about soccer in conference presentations, as opposed to I'm sure that probably wouldn't happen 15 years ago.
Well,
right?
It is an EMEA talk, so that is topical.
So Jamie, have we got any more questions for Pete?
So one from me, actually. So you said early on that feedback is a gift. So what effective ways are there to prepare someone to receive that feedback? Because I guess if you just wade in with it, they may not even want to hear from you, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and that is a critical aspect. So thank you for the question. You have to ask. You have to read the room. So, if you're with a buddy who's doing a presentation and it goes horribly wrong and you can see that they're seething, that is not the time for them to be mentally capable and ready to take in this feedback of like, oh, great, it was worse than I thought. So you need to be mindful of the fact that it's not always the right time. You need to ask to be invited. The key here is, if I ask you and you invite me and say, yes, I welcome the feedback, then it's really on them to take that feedback as is, be constructive, but understand that even sometimes when they get that feedback, it might rub them the wrong way. And I've had that happen to me where I have asked to give feedback. They've said, yes, I want it, but what they were expecting was the pat on the back. That's not what I was delivering at that time. So, this is one of those things where they need to learn that, look, say no. I'm okay with no, and you have to be okay with no to either cycle back or maybe never cycle back. Some people don't want it. Some people don't want to hear it. But yes, it's a great question. You should always ask.
Absolutely. And I think timing's important with that as well. I'm listening to podcast, the You Are Not So Smart podcast. It's well worth checking out. It's about psychology and things like that. And they were saying the example they used with feedback was is about timing as well. So the example he gave, the guest on there said that he'd been to see a friend who acts and the play wasn't particularly good. And the friend comes rushing up to him after the show and says, how was it? How was it? So he said he wasn't going to lie, but he wasn't going to give her the brutal truth either.
Oh, we lost Jamie there.
Well, at least he ended in a smile.
He just said that I enjoyed being able. Yeah. Am I back?
Yes, you're back.
Yeah, you're back.
Yeah. So he didn't lie to her, but then a few days passed, and then he was able to bring up the topic and ask and to approach it that way. So
you need to be in that mental space where you're prepared for whatever is going to come, and understand that, again, it's not malicious. You have to presume positive intent. The reason, as a leader, the reason that I come to you to say we can be better is not because I want to beat you up and make you feel bad. I'm trying to motivate you to say, look, that was good. If we make this change, then things are going to be that much better. And let's try that and experiment. This is what DevOps is all about.
There's for folks who are interested in that kind of space, there's if you read Hastings' book about Netflix, there's a lot of very, very interesting stuff in there about the culture of candid feedback that kind of drives high performance at Netflix. But
it has to be culture. That's a cultural change. Everyone's like, "Hey, it's coming."
Yeah, that's absolutely a core part of, and both ways. I would also add to that discussion that if you present as a leader, as someone who welcomes feedback yourself, then that promotes a space in which people feel that feedback is safe.
And it's about being vulnerable. So when I ran teams, I was forthright to say, look, I know that wasn't great. I need your help. Yeah. When you ask for help. So that's another key is if you are the one asking for that feedback and saying, look, I understand that wasn't great. How could I have done it differently? How could I have done it better? And be vulnerable to the fact that you're not perfect. You didn't do it the right way, and that you're ready to learn. People see that and respond to it.
Well, I think we could talk about that topic all day. It's certainly something that's super interesting to me, but we do have a conference to get on with. So thank you very much, Pete. I enjoyed that talk tremendously. Thank you for joining us, for getting up early, and hopefully you'll stick around and see some more of the great content that we've got coming up.